I'm Giselle, a 30-year-old senior auditor living in a quiet apartment in Seattle. My life is built on precision logic and the silent responsibility of being the family's unofficial safety net. But at 5:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, my world shifted with a single notification. Giselle, please stay in Seattle. This European trip is for the real family only. The message from my sister flashed on the group chat, cold and exclusionary. I stared at the screen waiting for some form of protest or at least an explanation from my parents, but they simply hearted the message in silence. For years, I had been the one to clean up every mess they made, from overdue bills to legal headaches. But the moment they touched their dream of high society in Zurich, I was suddenly an outsider. I chose to remain silent and went back to the grind of numbers until exactly 11:45 p.m. that night. My phone exploded with missed calls and a stream of panicked messages. Pickup. Emergency. We're in deep trouble. Please, Giselle. Save us. They wanted me to fix everything. As always. But this time, behind that plea for help lies a terrifying truth that could destroy my entire career. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now to join me as I uncover this brutal identity trap in the upcoming parts. The rain in Seattle was relentless that morning, a gray curtain that seemed to mirror the heavy silence of my apartment after that brutal exchange on the group chat. I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in self-pity as the fiscal year-end was approaching, and my desk at the firm was buried under a mountain of complex audit reports. By 8 a.m., I was already submerged in spreadsheets, the blue light of my dual monitors stinging my eyes as I cross-referenced international tax filings. My phone sat face down on the mahogany surface, but it vibrated every few minutes with the persistent notifications of social media tags. Against my better judgment, I stole a glance during my coffee break. The screen was flooded with images of a world that felt light years away from my fluorescent-lit cubicle. Nadia had wasted no time in transforming their trip into a digital spectacle. There she was, draped in a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, posing on the terrace of the Boer au Lac. The hotel was a masterpiece of old-world elegance, its gilded balconies overlooking the glassy surface of Lake Zurich, where white swans glided with effortless grace. Beside her stood the man of the hour, Tristan. This was the first time I had seen more than a grainy profile of him. He looked every bit the part of an international investment mogul dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, with a smile that suggested he owned every cobblestone in Switzerland. My sister's caption was a direct jab at my absence, praising his generosity for flying the important members of the family out to witness their success. I tried to shake off the bitterness and return to my work, but a different kind of notification caught my attention. A text message from my primary bank alerted me to a successful international transaction of $1,200. My brow furrowed in confusion. I hadn't made any purchases, let alone one in Swiss francs. Thinking it might be a glitch, I opened the group chat to ask if anyone knew anything about it. Nadia's reply came back almost instantly, laced with her typical dismissive arrogance. She told me to stop being so paranoid and explained that it was just a minor travel insurance fee for the group. She claimed that since I wasn't there to contribute to the physical labor of the trip, I should at least have the decency to handle the administrative costs of our parents' safety. Her words stung, yet the auditor in me found it strange that a travel insurance policy would be billed directly to my secondary account, which I rarely used. Before I could press for more details, a follow-up message from my mother, Ruth, appeared. She begged me not to ruin their one happy moment with my constant obsession over pennies. She insisted that Tristan was taking care of everything, and that this was just a small oversight in the booking process that they would reimburse me for once they returned. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a familiar mixture of guilt and exhaustion that usually led me to give in. I chose to believe them, or perhaps I was just too drained to fight a battle from 5,000 miles away. I put the phone in my drawer and forced myself back into the world of corporate liabilities and assets. I convinced myself that $1,200 was a small price to pay for peace, unaware that this was merely the first leak in a dam that was about to burst. My family was basking in the golden glow of Zurich, using my hard-earned reputation as their golden ticket to a life they couldn't afford. The vibration of my phone against the wooden nightstand sounded like a jackhammer in the dead silence of my bedroom. I lunged for the device, my heart hammering against my ribs as I saw the time, 11:46 p.m. My thumb swiped the screen before the fifth ring could finish. The voice on the other end wasn't the confident, booming baritone of my father Bernard. Instead, it was a thin, ragged gasp that sounded as if he had been running for miles. He didn't even say hello. He just began to sob, a dry, racking sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. I sat upright, clutching the duvet to my chest, asking him to breathe, to tell me what had happened. "He's gone, Giselle." He finally choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of sheer terror. "Tristan is gone. He took everything. The cash we brought for the gala, the emergency funds, even your mother's diamond heirloom set. He just vanished while we were at dinner." My blood ran cold as the image of the polished, charcoal-suited man from the photos shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Tristan wasn't a mogul. He was a professional predator who had scented our family's desperation from an ocean away. Bernard continued to ramble, explaining how they had returned to their suite to find the safe hanging open and the room ransacked. The charming investor had played them with the precision of a concert pianist, waiting for the perfect moment to strike before disappearing into the alpine night. The theft, however, was only the beginning of the nightmare. In the background, I could hear the sharp, rhythmic clicking of heels on marble and the stern, muffled tones of a man speaking German. Bernard's voice dropped to a frantic whisper. He told me that when the manager of the Boer au Lac realized Tristan had skipped out on the tab, the entire atmosphere had shifted from hospitality to hostility. In a fit of blind rage and panic, Bernard had attempted to storm out, causing a scene in the lobby that resulted in a shattered 19th-century vase and a damaged mahogany reception desk. The hotel security had intercepted them, and the local police were already stationed at the exits. "Why are you calling me Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "Call the embassy. Call the police." "We can't." He hissed, the sound of my mother Ruth wailing in the distance puncturing the line. "The manager." He brought out the paperwork, Giselle. He said the entire stay, the gala sponsorship, and the incidental credit line were all secured under your name. Nadia told us you had authorized it as a gift. She signed the digital indemnity forms using your financial profile and your secondary credit card. My breath hitched. I felt the room spinning as the gravity of the betrayal settled in my stomach like lead. The minor travel insurance Nadia had mentioned earlier was a smokescreen for a full-scale financial kidnapping. The manager was now demanding an immediate settlement of the outstanding balance, which had ballooned due to the property damages and the unpaid luxury services. He had given them an ultimatum: pay the bill immediately or face criminal charges for fraud and vandalism under Swiss law. Because the contract was in my name, they were holding my financial identity hostage. I was no longer just the sister who stayed behind. I was the legal shield they had used to fund their delusions, and now that shield was about to be shattered by the Zurich authorities. The air in my Seattle apartment felt suddenly thin, as if the walls were closing in on me while my father's desperate voice continued to crackle over the speakerphone. I didn't waste another second on tears or useless questions. My professional instincts, sharpened by years of auditing high-stakes corporate fraud, kicked into overdrive. I moved to my desk with a numb, mechanical precision, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the grim set of my jaw. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard banking apps to log directly into my comprehensive credit monitoring portal. I needed to see the full wreckage, not just the hospitality bill in Zurich. As the dashboard loaded, a jagged red warning banner flashed across the top of the site, indicating a massive change in my debt-to-income ratio. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. Beneath the pending hotel authorization sat something far more sinister, a freshly minted business line of credit. My breath hitched as I clicked on the details. The account had been opened exactly 14 days ago at a regional bank branch right here in Seattle, while I was away on a mandatory 3-day audit in Olympia. The total credit limit was staggering $120,000. According to the digital ledger, nearly 85% of that amount had already been liquidated through wire transfers to various international accounts over the last week. I sat there frozen in the cold light of the screen as the pieces of the puzzle locked into place with a terrifying click. This wasn't just a case of my sister Nadia being reckless with a credit card. This was a calculated deep tissue betrayal. I opened the scanned PDF of the original loan application, and there it was, the smoking gun. Attached to the file were copies of my private tax returns from the previous year and my original Social Security card. Only 2 people on this planet knew where I kept those documents in my fireproof home safe. My parents, Bernard and Ruth, had used the spare key I gave them for emergencies to infiltrate my sanctuary. They hadn't just borrowed my name. They had effectively dismantled my financial soul to fund Nadia's delusions of European grandeur. The signature at the bottom of the contract was a chillingly accurate forgery of my own handwriting. It was a clumsy imitation of my looped G, yet close enough to bypass a distracted bank officer. I felt a wave of icy fury wash over me, replacing the initial shock. They had leveraged my years of hard work, my pristine credit score, and my professional reputation as collateral for a lifestyle they could never afford. By opening a business credit line under the guise of an investment consultancy, they had bypassed the usual safeguards meant to protect individual consumers. This was no longer a family squabble or a misunderstanding about travel expenses. This was a felony. This was identity theft in its most predatory form, perpetrated by the very people who were supposed to protect me. Bernard's sobbing on the phone now sounded less like grief and more like the panicked whining of a cornered criminal. He hadn't called me because he was sorry. He had called me because the credit line was tapped out, and the hotel was the only thing standing between them and a Swiss holding cell. They had built their house of cards on the foundation of my life, and as I stared at the $120,000 of debt now tied to my name, I realized they were fully prepared to let me bury myself in the rubble to keep their secret safe. The silence of my office was shattered again by the sharp, demanding ring of my cell phone. Before I could even process the crushing weight of the $120,000 debt, I had just discovered my screen lit up with another incoming call from Switzerland. This time, it wasn't just my father's trembling voice on the line. As I pressed the record button on my secondary device, a habit ingrained in me from years of documenting financial discrepancies, the phone erupted into a chaotic symphony of desperation and vitriol. Nadia's voice sliced through the speaker, first stripped of its usual melodic arrogance, and replaced by a shrill, predatory panic. "Giselle, stop playing games and listen to me," she screamed, her breath hitching as if she were on the verge of a breakdown. "The police are standing right outside the manager's office. They've already taken our passports. If you don't wire $50,000 to the hotel's corporate account within the next hour, they are going to arrest Dad and me for grand larceny. You are the only one who can make this go away." I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. There was no apology for the stolen documents, no remorse for the forged signature that had just handcuffed my future. Instead, there was only a demand for more. "Where do you expect me to get $50,000, Nadia?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, the auditor in me meticulously tracking every syllable they uttered. "You've already drained my credit and saddled me with a debt that will take me a decade to pay off." That was when my mother Ruth interjected. Her voice wasn't filled with the gentle warmth I remembered from my childhood. It was a weaponized sob designed to pierce my resolve. "Giselle, honey, think about your career," she pleaded, though the underlying threat was unmistakable. The hotel contract is in your name. The business loan is in your name. If we go down for fraud in Zurich, the authorities will notify the American regulators. You're a senior auditor, a fiduciary. Do you really think you'll keep your CPA license if your name is tied to an international criminal investigation? If we go to prison, you go with us. You'll be ruined. Everything you've worked for in Seattle will vanish by sunrise. The sheer audacity of their strategy made my skin crawl. They weren't asking for help. They were holding my reputation hostage using the very crimes they had committed against me as leverage to force my compliance. Bernard finally spoke, his voice muffled as if he were trying to hide his face from the hotel staff. I only did what Tristan suggested to secure our future, Giselle. I just used your name because yours was the only one with any value left. We were going to pay it all back before you even noticed. Please just send the $50,000. It's the only way to bury this. I sat in the dark watching the recording timer on my desk tick upward, capturing every word of his confession. He had admitted it. He had admitted to using my identity and my credit for their reckless gamble. My heart was cold, stone cold, as the last thread of familial loyalty snapped. They truly believed that my fear of a scandal would outweigh my desire for justice. They thought I was the same safety net I had always been, the girl who would burn her own life to the ground just to keep them warm. But as Nadia started screaming again, threatening to tell the Swiss police that I was the mastermind behind the entire scheme, I realized that the only way to save my career was to ensure they faced the full, unmitigated weight of the law. I hung up the phone without uttering another word, my hands no longer trembling but moving with the cold, calculated efficiency of a woman who had spent a decade dissecting corporate crimes. The first call I made wasn't to a bank, but to Sky, my closest friend, and a formidable attorney specializing in financial litigation here in Seattle. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, her voice instantly sharpening as I laid out the catastrophic details of the identity theft. Sky didn't waste time on platitudes. She gave me a series of staccato commands: freeze every single credit bureau file, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion immediately, then notify the fraud department of the regional bank about the business line of credit. Do not under any circumstances acknowledge that debt as yours. Following her lead, I navigated the digital labyrinth of financial security with surgical precision. Within 30 minutes, I had locked my financial existence behind an impenetrable wall of security freezes. But that was just the defensive phase. To save my career and my freedom, I had to transition into a full-scale offensive. I opened a new secure portal and began drafting an official identity theft report to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local authorities. I attached the audio recording of Bernard's confession, the scanned PDF of the forged business loan, and a comprehensive digital trail of my activity over the last fortnight. My primary weapon was my alibi. I uploaded my official timesheets from the audit firm, my GPS location data from the company car, and the biometric logs from my office in downtown Seattle. These documents provided irrefutable proof that I had been thousands of miles away from the branch where the loan was signed, and even further from the Boer au Lac in Zurich. I was a ghost in their narrative, a victim whose name had been hijacked to fuel a fantasy. Once the American reports were filed and assigned case numbers, Sky helped me translate the essential points into a formal statement for the Zurich Cantonal Police. I dialed the international number for the hotel's security office and asked to be transferred to the commanding officer on site. When a man identifying himself as Inspector Weber answered, I didn't speak as a terrified daughter. I spoke as a victim of a coordinated felony. I informed him that I was a senior auditor currently in Seattle and that I was recording our conversation for my legal counsel. I stated clearly that the people in his custody, Bernard, Ruth, and Nadia, had stolen my identity to secure their stay and sponsorship. I provided him with the FBI case number and told him that any contract bearing my name was the result of a fraudulent forgery. Inspector, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I am officially flagging all transactions and agreements associated with my name at your establishment as criminal activity. I do not authorize any payments, nor do I assume responsibility for the damages caused by these individuals. I am requesting that you proceed with a full criminal investigation into the unauthorized use of my identity by the parties currently in your building. I will cooperate fully with the prosecution, but I will not be your benefactor. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Weber's tone shifted from stern annoyance to professional alertness as he realized he was no longer dealing with a family dispute but a documented international fraud case. Skye watched me from across the video call, a grim smile of approval on her face. We had successfully flipped the trap. By refusing to pay the $50,000 and instead reporting the crime, I had severed the only tether the hotel had to my bank account. I was no longer the one being hunted. I was the one providing the evidence that would lock the cage. The sun was beginning to bleed over the Seattle skyline, casting long, pale shadows across my office when the final confirmation from Inspector Weber arrived. The gears of international justice had turned with a cold, grinding finality. Nadia, stripped of her designer wardrobe and her delusions of grandeur, was officially detained in Zurich to face charges of hospitality fraud and criminal conspiracy. Without the $50,000 she had demanded from me, the hotel had refused to drop the case. She was no longer a guest at the Boer au Lac. She was a suspect in a cold holding cell waiting for the legal system to decide her fate. Across the Atlantic, the repercussions for Bernard and Ruth were equally swift. Their emergency deportation was fast-tracked, as the Swiss authorities wanted them out of their jurisdiction once the identity theft report was validated. The moment they stepped off the plane at SeaTac International Airport, they weren't met with the warm embrace of a real family, but with a team of federal investigators. My recorded evidence of their confession had been enough to initiate a grand jury inquiry into bank fraud. As they were led into an interrogation room, the bank they had defrauded began the aggressive process of foreclosure. The house I had helped them keep for years, the sanctuary they had used to plot against me, was now being seized to cover the $120,000 debt. I spent that Saturday morning in a state of clinical detachment. With Skye by my side, I visited a locksmith to change every entry point to my apartment and updated my digital security protocols. I didn't wait for the inevitable wave of guilt-tripping phone calls or the flying monkeys from our extended family to start their harassment. I selected every contact associated with the names Bernard, Ruth, and Nadia, and with a single firm tap, I blocked them across every platform. I severed the digital umbilical cord that had allowed them to bleed me dry for nearly a decade. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was the most expensive and beautiful silence I had ever purchased. By afternoon, I found myself standing alone in the center of my quiet, sun-drenched living room. For the first time in 30 years, the crushing weight of their expectations had been lifted. I was no longer a safety net, a wallet, or a scapegoat. I was just Giselle. My career was safe, my credit would eventually recover under the protection of the fraud report, and my soul was finally my own. I looked at the photos on my mantle, old grainy images of a family that had never truly existed outside of my own desperate hopes. I realized then that blood is not a binding contract for abuse, and being a good daughter does not require you to be a victim. This ordeal taught me a lesson that no audit report or financial ledger could ever provide. True family is not defined by those who share your DNA, but by those who respect your boundaries and cherish your well-being. Kindness, when directed at people who are willing to destroy you for a fleeting moment of vanity, is not a virtue, it is a liability. I learned that saying no to toxicity is the highest form of self-love. As I watched the city below wake up to a new day, I knew that the price of my freedom had been high, but the cost of staying in that cycle of betrayal would have been my very life. I stepped onto my balcony, breathed in the crisp Seattle air, and finally, for the very first time, I felt like I was home.